achieved. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this edition of the show, we're taking a look at UFC 150, Henderson versus Edgar, and we'll get into that in a second. But I want to talk about the last fight, UFC on Fox 4. Great night of fights, even more importantly, great night of predictions. I predicted 10 fights. The Phil Davis one came off the books when it became a no contest. The remaining 9 fights, I went 8-1 overall. But two huge things. First and foremost, the bet site that I work with did not offer the flyweight matchup initially when I was doing the betting and getting my stuff handled. So all 8 fights I bet on, I got all 8 of them right. Not only did I get the 8 fighters right, I got all 8 outcomes right, and it produced the biggest financial return I've ever had in my gambling history, and I've been betting for a long time. It was massive. And for those of you who bought the bet packs, most likely had similar success. I hope you did as well, because I nailed multiple parlays in the bet packs. Almost every single fight breakdown based on the betting odds was bang on, including saying, Ulysses Gomez, there were a couple X factors there might make you stay away from that fight. My value picks, number 1, Haniyaya paying $270. I hit the top 4 in my value picks. I also had Nam Pham as a value pick. Huge payout there. Joe Lozon and Manny Gambarian all to win their fights. My confidence picks I did very well in as well. And my prop bets, 5 for 5, including $265 picking Machida to knock out Bader. Almost worked out perfectly. Again, you can see that in my breakdown, how I expected that one to go. I had Shogun to knock out Brandon Vera. It was a great night. You can check out the entire bet pack in my UFC on Fox 4 post-fight, which Joel Riche wrote up for me over at kamikazeoverdrive.net, so please check them out. And I encourage you, UFC 150, hopefully another good night. And for those people coming off UFC 149 who bought the bet pack and then didn't buy the next one, what I keep telling people is stick with it. Don't just buy one, and if it's not a good one, abandon. You're going to find success when you start buying 4 and 5 in a row, because you realize I've won on 2 or 3 of the last bet packs, and I've got money in my account now because I've stuck with it. And it's the same people coming back every time. I have a consistent group of buyers who are always buying the bet pack, and they're the ones who are going to find the most success. It's a small investment to make to get some pretty good information based on a lot of research and work that I've put in. So I implore you, buy UFC 150 and keep buying them, and you'll slowly see your bankroll starting to build up, and it's the consistent buyers who will have the most success. And, I'd love it if people could buy it one time and win huge and, have success that way. But the way gambling works, it's grind it out. Stick with it. Eventually, you will find success. And again, UFC 150 in the bet shop over at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Ready to buy right now for $10. Also on the website, Joel Riche and Joe Caporelli will be posting their predictions for this event. I've got some new writers who are working for me who are posting some pretty cool stuff over at kamikazeoverdrive.net. And if you're a fan of the NFL, I'm working on an expert who's going to come in and do bet packs as well for the NFL. He worked in the gambling industry, in the gaming industry, helping to set NFL sports lines. So again, keep an eye out for that if you're an NFL bettor, and you'll be able to see a lot of the same information and some very good, insightful information to help you make some money on NFL Sundays. And finally, before I get into my first prediction, thank you very much to all of my sponsors: MMABettingOdds.com, HeartandGlory.com, CouchFighter.co, MMACrypt.com, the boys of the Adrenaline Training Center. Those links available on my website or in the YouTube description box. God, that's been a mouthful. Let's get to my first prediction. And again, you already know this if you watched my preliminary video already. In an effort to condense the length of the videos, I've broken my preliminary predictions and my main card predictions into 2 separate videos. So if you haven't already, please check out my preliminary breakdowns on the other video, my preliminary predictions. But now I'm about to get into my 5 main card fights, including the hugely anticipated main event between the current lightweight champion Ben Henderson and the challenger former champion Frankie the Answer Edgar. Here are my main card predictions for UFC 150. We head now to our first main card predictions in the UFC featherweight division, as Ultimate Fighter alumni Justin the American Kid Lawrence 4-0 battles Max Blessed Holloway 5-1-0, 2 of the youngest fighters on the UFC card. Justin Lawrence is coming off an impressive debut victory where he knocked out John Kofor on the Ultimate Fighter with a vicious head kick 20 seconds into the 3rd round. Max Holloway, on the other hand, this will be his 3rd trip to the octagon. He took the first fight on short notice and lost via mounted triangle armbar against Dustin Poirier, but in his last fight, a dominant striking performance, defeating Pat Schilling by decision. He comes in with 1 win by knockout, 4 wins by decision. Now this fight, Lawrence, looking at him first, the guy has a huge kickboxing background. Now that win over Kofor was his first MMA knockout, but the guy has a ton of kickboxing, amateur kickboxing experience. I believe I've heard as high as 150 amateur kickboxing victories. Now, at the same time, his kickboxing is good. He actually got outlanded in quantity by John Coffer in his last fight, who is, for the most part, a wrestler. And he got rocked a couple times, so I was a little bit nervous in that. I think his striking defense needs to be tightened up a little bit, especially in the MMA, where you're dealing with so many different things, and against guys who have fought at, obviously, beyond the amateur level. Either way, he certainly has the skills and the feet. His ground game, he does have a win by submission. His ground game is a little bit questionable. On The Ultimate Fighter, he got taken out after a tough fight against the eventual winner of The Ultimate Fighter, Mike Chiesa. He got put on his back in round 3 and TKO'd, and that certainly is an area of concern if the fight goes to the ground, which I really don't expect it to against Max Holloway. Holloway comes into this, 1 win by knockout, 4 wins by decision, but the guy's a striking machine. Against Pat Schilling, he landed 119 total strikes against Schilling. In his 2 UFC fights against Poirier and Schilling, he averages 7.02 strikes per minute. And even against Poirier in the early going, he was throwing big-time shots against Dustin, who eventually had to take him to the ground and submit him. So again, maybe some areas of concern with Holloway's ground game, but I don't think anywhere where Lawrence can exploit them. One big thing physically, since this fight's going to spend a lot of its time in the striking exchanges, Max Holloway is going to have, he only has 1 inch of reach, but he'll also have 3 inches of height, which will give him some length, and he does some nice things with his hands and legs, some combinations. He really works, and this guy knows how to blast the body, and that's something that Lawrence is going to need to be careful of. If Holloway starts unloading with those body shots, which he's so capable of, it'll really zap a young fighter's endurance and confidence. And when I say young fighter Justin Lawrence, he's actually 2 years the senior of Max Holloway. Either way, I like what Holloway showed. He does have decent takedown defense against in his last fight against Pat Schilling. Schilling has some a wrestling background. He shot for some takedowns, could not get Holloway to the ground. Holloway, a nice sprawl, showed some strong hips against the cage, and really defended himself nicely. But again, I don't expect a lot of groundwork. Schilling does a nice job with his, or sorry, not Schilling, Holloway does a nice job with his speed, works his footwork, shows a lot of feints, which gets his opponents to react, creates some openings, and then he capitalizes on them. He mixes in some jumping knees, excellent body kicks, and again, his high volume of strikes is a huge part of his arsenal, and he does a nice job with the jab, using it to set things up. And of course, when you attack off the jab, it's that much harder to defend what follows that jab, as opposed to just throwing and hoping your opponent isn't prepared to deal with what you have. Again, Justin Lawrence has an amateur kickboxing background and a boxing background, so he's a more capable striker, but I think he's a little bit green here in this situation. And, you know, this is his second fight in the UFC, and he actually has a fight on a Strikeforce undercard, too, so it's not like he's unaware of what the big stage is all about. But I really like what Holloway showed me. He's got a lot of confidence. I really like the way he turns into his punches and he can snap his combinations. And I think when it comes right down to it, if Lawrence can't handle Holloway's high volume of strikes, I think that's going to be a huge issue. So I'm going to take Max Holloway to defeat Justin Lawrence by decision. We now head to the UFC's middleweight division as Yushin Thunder Okami 27-7-0 battles 12-2-0 Buddy Roberts. Roberts taking this fight after Husamir Palhares is pulled out due to injury. Okami coming off a pair of losses, first to Anderson Silva, and then that shocking comfort behind victory by Tim Boetsch when he knocked out Okami in round 3. Buddy Roberts, on the other hand, a unanimous decision winner for Kyle Magalhaes at UFC on FX Johnson versus McCall in his UFC debut. Roberts is a Greg Jackson-trained fighter, 5 wins by submission being his greatest win total, 4 wins by knockout, 3 by decision. Okami, on the other hand, 9 by knockout, 4 by submission, 12 by decision. Taking a look at Buddy Roberts first, his debut he took on Magalhaes. Magalhaes wanted to get that fight to the ground. Roberts looked pretty good. He looked pretty comfortable defending the takedowns, using his striking. He showed a pretty nice use of a jab, following with an overhand right after that. He has solid balance, again, defending the takedowns. He'll have a 3-inch reach advantage in this fight, which should aid him against Okami if the fight does stay at range. He has some serious power in his right hand, and certainly that can help him out. But a big concern for me in that last fight is by round 3, he was gassed. And again, I know it's his debut, and that can take a lot out, but he was running away, and he got taken down in round 3 after pretty much winning the first 2 rounds, and not, I don't think he overextended himself that much. And against a guy like Yushin Okami, who's a very physical fighter, that could come back to hurt him. Okami, despite his loss against Boetsch, he ate Tim Boetsch up in round 1 with his striking, destroyed Tim Boetsch in round 2 with his ground and pound, and beat him up. And then he got knocked out in round 3, maybe overconfidence, maybe he was lulled into a false sense of security. Maybe Tim Boetsch had him right where he wanted him with his little game plan of, let him beat the crap out of me for 2 rounds, and then I'll stop him in round 3, and then I'll go on to beat Hector Lombard by doing nothing. Sorry, I digress. Yushin Okami, he's really improved his boxing as of late, really using some nice straight punches and good combinations. He's a big man. He hits very hard. His grappling has always been solid. We know he trained with Chael Sonnen, which certainly will improve that. He used the double underhooks against the cage. He can put his opponent on the ground. He worked nice against Boch. They continue to transition to get in advantageous positions and pummel and beat him up. He has that crushing top control, good ground and pound. He can pass a guard. He's definitely a type of fighter who has a lot of skills. Unfortunately, his one-sided defeat against Anderson Silva has precluded him from getting a shot at the title until Anderson Silva retires, and the Tim Boch loss knocked him out of the top 10, in my opinion anyway, or at least to the lower end of it. I think he'll be back. I like him in this fight. I don't think Buddy Roberts has a ton to offer unless he's able to catch him with a strike. Either way, I think Buddy Roberts taking this fight, I give him a lot of credit for stepping up and realizing the opportunity to fight a top-level fighter like Yushin Okami, but I think Okami has a lot of advantages here. Should have the advantage in striking technique, should have the advantage in strength, should have the advantage in grappling. I'm going to take Yushin Okami to defeat Buddy Roberts, and I think he's going to do it by TKO. We continue in the middleweight division and into a fight that I'm very much looking forward to as Jake Shields, 27-6-1, makes his UFC middleweight debut, battling Ed Short Fuse Herman, 27-0. Taking a look at Shields, he is coming off a decision win at UFC 144 when he defeated Yoshihiro Akiyama in his final welterweight matchup. Now, Ed Herman, on the other hand, since coming back from his terrible knee injury suffered against Aaron Simpson, has reeled off 3 wins in a row, defeating Tim Crater by punches and then submitting Kyle Noak and Clifford Stark. Ed Herman has been on a roll of late. Overall, their numbers, Ed Herman, 6 wins by knockout, 12 wins by submission, 2 by decision. He has been submitted 4 times. On the opposite side of things, Jake Shields, on the other hand, we know what he's all about. 3 wins by knockout, 10 wins by submission, 14 by decision. His big total is 4 losses by decision. Taking a look at how these guys match up physically, Ed Herman gets the nod in a couple major categories. He's going to have 2 inches of height, and he's going to have 3 inches of reach, which will certainly help him to maintain the striking exchanges and maintaining distance. Jake Shields is a little bit of an undersized middleweight. We saw it against Robbie Lawler. We saw it a little bit against Dan Henderson, so we want to argue with that. But either way, Jake Shields is not a huge middleweight, hence his move down to welterweight. But Jake Shields, certainly, he was the former Strikeforce middleweight champion, has a lot of credentials coming in, has some pretty decent wins under his belt. Like we know, he has that win over Dan Henderson fighting at middleweight. He defeated Jason Miller, Robbie Lawler. The guy knows how to win fights. He's got that amazing grappling pedigree, the American Jiu-Jitsu as you want to call it. But Ed Herman, far from a novice on the ground, he is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He trains with Team Quest and the grappling guys there, so certainly knows how to handle himself. And I was impressed with his win against Kyle Noak, where he continually chained submissions together and eventually caught him in a submission. Similar against Clifford Stark, he showed some excellent grappling abilities there, taking him down and eventually locking up the rear naked choke and getting the tap out there. Jake Shields, less than impressive in his last fight against Yoshihiro Akiyama. Yes, he got the decision win, and it was mainly based on his striking. Akiyama, a well-known judokan, and Shields really struggled to get into the mat. It took him to the final stages of the last round before he took his back, actually, when he took him down and got control of him. But prior to that, Akiyama was able to continually shuck him off, and that's a big thing you look at. What happens if Jake Shields cannot get a fight to the ground? Now, again, he won that fight based on his striking, but basically because Akiyama was so focused on defending the takedowns, he did not do enough to striking to outpoint Shields, and it gave Shields the victory. Jake is a specialist. He basically has one form of attack, and that's the ground game. He's been working on striking, but it's certainly nothing to write home about. He has a nice left body kick and inside leg kick, which can do some damage. His hands, he'll throw a 1-2, but again, it's all to set up his takedowns if he gets that opportunity. Now, Ed Herman, on the other hand, he is far more dangerous with his striking. He has a beautiful uppercut. We saw him knock out Tim Crater with it. We saw him tag Clifford Starks a couple times with it. Now, his striking defense in that matchup was a little bit less than desirable, as he did get hammered a couple times by, I think it was a big right hand from Starks. But again, Jake Shields not the type of guy who's going to throw haymakers. Again, he'll throw some pitter-patter jabs and straight punches and kicks, looking to set up his grappling. I give Ed Herman a huge advantage in the striking category. He's one of these tough, gutsy guys who's going to keep coming forward and wail away on you. And he averages 3.5 strikes per minute compared to Jake Shields at 2.55. So if this fight stays standing, Jake Shields probably is not going to be able to outpoint him. And I think Ed Herman's going to do some serious damage with his striking. On the ground, Ed Herman, 70% takedown defense. He's a tough dude to take down, and he actually averages more takedowns per fight at 4.18 compared to Jake Shields at 3.62. Another big number that stands out to me, and I know some people don't like these stats, Jake Shields only completes 38% of his takedown attempts, which means he doesn't land. He's not the greatest athlete in the world, and he struggles to get fights to the ground. And if he's facing again Ed Herman, who's got good takedown defense and is physically the larger fighter, that could really make it tough for Shields to get the fight to the mat. If Shields can get things to the ground, get on top, and control Herman, he certainly should be in control and be able to grind out a decision victory. But that's a big if. Herman has been tapped out a couple times in his career, but it's not like it was by some novice fighters. He got submitted by Damian Maia, tapped out by Jason McDonald, which were a couple difficult guys to face. Joe Dorkson also has a submission victory over him, and Kazuo Mizaki. So certainly some decent ground guys. Jake Shields is a world-class level ground fighter, but one thing we found out in recent times is he's not on the level he was when he was fighting in Strikeforce. When he beat Dan Henderson, Henderson struggles to make 185. I believe that was the last time we saw Dan Henderson at 185 because of how difficult the weight cut was. He got blasted in that opening round and then eventually came back and used his grappling against a gassed opponent. But even you go back and you take a look at the Martin Kampmann matchup, Kampmann gave Jake Shields a lot of trouble on the ground. Had Kampmann fought a smarter fight, he probably ends up with a victory based on his striking. You go back to the Jason Miller fight, and Jason Miller, it was a controversial decision. I just rewatched that fight. Shields got the victory, but Miller had a lot of success taking Shields down, beating him up, reversing him, making Shields work very hard to maintain any form of control on the mat. And go back to that Robbie Lawler matchup until Shields caught him with the standing guillotine. Lawler kind of struck him off, and it was very noticeable that Shields was the undersized fighter. Either way, I like what Jake Shields does. He's a very good grappler. His striking is less than desirable. And one thing I've always been talked about is in a fight you're not sure who's going to win, go with the guy who has more dimensions. Ed Herman will need to keep this fight standing, use his size to defend the takedowns, and work his striking. Use that uppercut, those straight punches, and beat up Jake Shields. And I think Ed Herman will be able to do that. So I'm going to take Ed Herman in a minor upset to defeat Jake Shields by decision. We move now to the co-main event of the evening as Donald Cowboy Cerrone, 18-4-0 with 1 no contest, battles Melvin the Young Assassin Gillard, 47-11-3 with 1 no contest as well. The winner of this fight could potentially be in line for a number 1 contenders bout afterwards. Donald Cerrone coming off a dominant decision victory over a very heavy-handed and dangerous striker in Jeremy Stephens. Prior to that, he lost to Nate Diaz in a match that had he won, probably he is next in line for a title shot like Nate Diaz is now. Melvin Gillard, on the other hand, he too had an impressive run snapped when he lost back-to-back fights by submission to Joe Lozon and Jim Miller, but he's coming off a impressive decision victory over Fabricio Camoins back at UFC 148. Big numbers for these guys. In the win category, Melvin Gillard, of his 30 wins, 19 have come by knockout, another 9 by decision. He does have 2 by submission. Donald Cerrone, on the other hand, has 1 win by knockout, but an impressive 13 wins by submission. Of the 2 fighters, the big number that stands out to me, Melvin Gillard, he has lost 10 fights in his career. In 9 of them, he has been submitted. And of course, we talked about Jim Miller and Joe Lozon tapping him out, and that's going to be a huge thing with Donald Cerrone. Cerrone's a lethal striker, as we saw against Jeremy Stephens, the way he just dominated Stephens, who is one of the dangerous, potentially the heaviest-handed guy in the division, maybe next to Melvin Gillard. And Cerrone just walked right through him, used that Muay Thai. Beautiful 1-2 combination followed by some snapping leg kicks. He had Stephens backpedaling. He had him hurt a number of times, and Cerrone looked so confident. And, of course, coming off that Nate Diaz fight where it was a lot of shit talked, and Diaz basically took it to Cerrone and backed him down and beat him up and put him in his place for the time being. Cerrone had a beautiful rebounding performance. I was very impressed overall with that. Melvin Gillard, the guy is potentially the quickest guy in the division, has huge power, 19 wins by knockout. He's knocked out Shane Roller, took out Evan Dunham by knockout. Waylon Lowe, some impressive wins there over guys. He had a split decision win over Jeremy Stephens, again, using his striking. When he trained with Greg Jackson, and we're going to talk about that in a second as well, he did a nice job of darting in and out. Since then, he's made some changes. He went to the Black Zillions. Doesn't show that movement nearly as much. Now, against Joe Lozon, he made some serious mistakes. Got dropped by a counter and submitted. Against Jim Miller, he was looking fantastic. He was tagging Miller and hurt him several times early on. But again, he made a mistake. Miller got the fight to the ground and got submitted. Against Fabricio Camoins, Gillard came back, was much more composed, did not make the big jumping attempts and the big leaps and the mistakes. He didn't panic when Camoins had him in some bad positions, mounted him, had his back a couple times, and Gillard just waited it out, used his defense, and eventually took an opening and escaped the position, reset, and went back to attacking with his striking. Donald Cerrone, the big thing with Cerrone is that submission game. And I want to talk about Melvin Gillard Again, he had a great effort against Kamikaze, but he was a little more reserved, and I have to assume that's because he realized that if Kamikaze, a BJJ black belt, I think second degree, if Melvin Guillard went to the ground and Kamikaze was able to get control of him, Guillard was in serious trouble. And I have to look at this fight saying, well, he's going to face Donald Cerrone, realizing if Cerrone gets him to the ground, it's going to be big-time trouble. Because you look at what Cerrone has done, taking on a very dangerous striker, Dennis Seaver, he knocked him to the ground, he submitted him. Did an excellent job. Same thing against Paul Kelly, same thing against Chris Hordesky. You know, we know what he's all about. His lone knockout victory was a body shot against Charles Oliveira. Cerrone has really turned a corner, and I really like that submission. This is his submission totals. Now, I talked about Greg Jackson. Melvin Guillard is a former Greg Jackson-trained fighter. Donald Cerrone is still with Greg Jackson. So you know for a fact, probably at some point, Cerrone and Guillard have worked together and trained together. But the big thing is, the trainers that are working with Donald Cerrone have also trained Melvin Guillard. They're going to know mentally how to prepare Cerrone for Guillard. They're going to know what Guillard's weaknesses are, and I'm sure Guillard's made some changes. But at the same time, you know, coaches just have that much more insight, probably more insight about a fighter than the actual fighter does, because they see things, and I'm sure they sat down and devised a game plan for Donald Cerrone that is going to key on Melvin's problems. And I think what it comes down to, I think Donald Cerrone's striking is a little more technical than Melvin's. Melvin's got some very fast hands, but I really like Cerrone's 1-2 with the leg kicks. He'll need to be a little bit more cautious holding his hands low like he did against Stevens, because if Melvin tags anybody, you're going to sleep most likely. But I really like Cerrone's use of kicks, his use of knees. He did a nice job short-circuiting any of Jeremy Stevens' forward attacks by, you know, quick little jabs or little leg kicks, throwing him off balance. And if Cerrone's able to unload with some low kicks on Melvin Guillard's legs, it could really take his speed and mobility out of it. Either way, Guillard's going to need to mind his P's and Q's. He's going to have to dominate on the feet. And if he's going to dominate to win this fight, because he's not going to want to go to the ground with Donald Cerrone. That's probably a death sentence for Guillard. And you look at the guys that Cerrone's lost to. Of his 4 career losses, 2 of them are against the reigning UFC lightweight champion in Ben Henderson. One of them against the man who's scheduled to fight the champion next in Nate Diaz, and then Jamie Varner, the other victor, who was the WEC champion at the time. So Donald Cerrone, not exactly an easy guy to defeat. Melvin Guillard, certainly a dangerous striker, but Donald Cerrone has more levels to his game. I think he's going to do a good job with his striking. Melvin Guillard will be extra cautious. I think at some point, whether it be by knockdown like Joe Lozon did to him, or Melvin Guillard making a mistake and Cerrone getting the fight to the ground like Jim Miller did, this fight's going to the mat. Fabricio Kamikaze got Guillard to the mat. I think Cerrone will be able to at some point too. So I'm going to take Donald Cowboy Cerrone to defeat Melvin Guillard by submission. We move now to the main event prediction of the evening with UFC's lightweight title on the line as the champion, Benson Smooth Henderson, 15-2-0, battles the man he took the title from, Frankie the Answer Edgar, 14-2-1, and these guys have been on a roll. Obviously, Frankie Edgar having his roll snapped in the last fight. You look at Ben Henderson, after joining the UFC, has defeated Mark Bocek, Jim Miller, Clay Guida, and Frankie Edgar. 3 top 10 guys and Mark Bocek on the cusp, so very impressive number of guys he's beaten. Frankie Edgar, prior to his loss, he defeated Gray Maynard, had the draw with Maynard, back-to-back wins over one of the greatest UFC lightweights of all time, BJ Penn, and he had wins over Matt Beach, former champion Sean Shirk, and another very talented fighter back in his day, Hermes Franca. So both guys, impressive runs of late. Now, this is the 3rd straight time we've had the lightweight title contested in a rematch situation. It was BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar, then Gray Maynard and Frankie Edgar, and now Ben Henderson and Frankie Edgar. Big question is if Frankie walks away with the title this time, you know for a fact Ben Henderson's going to say, you know, I took the title from you and I gave you a rematch. Where's my shot? We're 1-1. How do we decide this? I don't think they should. I think they got to get some new blood in there, and I know Nate Diaz is waiting for his opportunity to fight for the title. So I think that would certainly, I think they should get away from the rematches for a little bit. You know, if Ben Henderson does drop the title, he can get his shot at the winner of Nate Diaz and Frankie Edgar down the road. First thing I want to look at is size. Now, Ben Henderson comes in at 5'9" compared to 5'6" for Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar is an undersized lightweight. Probably should be fighting at featherweight, or at least physically, that's where he should be set. Doesn't cut a lot of weight. Ben Henderson is a very physically large. He's not very tall, but he's very big as a lightweight, and it showed up in the cage. It looked like it was a featherweight against a large lightweight in that matchup, in all honesty. That's the way it looked, and it was noticeable. Now, we all know what Frankie Edgar does to deal with this size advantage. He uses that speed, that footwork, he navigates the outside of the cage, comes in with some bang, 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 little combinations, peppers away at his opponent, and then circles out again and avoids the taking damage. Now, Gray Maynard had success handling with that, a little bit of success, catching Frankie as he came in, hurting him, but unable to finish him. Ben Henderson took that to the next level. He didn't really, other than the up kick, he really didn't inflict a lot of one big moment of damage with his hands, he spread it out nicely over 5 rounds. And that was the big thing. With Ben Henderson's size and strength, he really took it out of Frankie. He was doing more damage with his strikes than Frankie was with his. Frankie, I think his nose was broken from the up kick. He's battered and bruised. At the end of that fight, he looked like he'd been through a 5-round war. Ben Henderson looked like he'd gone for a jog to the store. So, that was a big telling point. Another thing, Ben does a nice job of cutting distance down. Where Frankie's very good at maintaining that distance and attacking, Ben steps into everything he throws, and he's fast to start with. He has very powerful legs where it allows him to cut the distance down, and he was able to make up some of that ground and do some damage with Frankie. Now, Frankie, a couple techniques he had some success with. Ben Henderson, very kick-heavy. He's got those big, strong legs, and he's able to do a lot of damage with his kicks. Frankie was catching those kicks and looking to attack off them, which was certainly something it was a varied success, because the kicks were landing, and not only were they landing, Frankie's holding there, and the judges are seeing, okay, that was a big kick. And Frankie would answer back with a punch or two, but it really wasn't having that much of an impact. Frankie, one technique he did it against Gray, he did it here a little bit, shoot for the takedown or go for a takedown, and when Ben reacts, Ben hit him with a quick combination because he's usually opened up. Pop, 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 crack him a couple times, and that's where he had damage. He dropped Ben with a combination and put him on his butt once. He needs to do more of that. That's a big thing. For Ben Henderson, keep those kicks, put pressure on him, and when he hits Frankie Edgar, he does damage. Continue to hit him, don't gas out. And that's another big advantage that Ben took away from Frankie's. Frankie's cardio and conditioning is never questioned. He's this type of guy who can go 5 rounds. In the last fight, he took a ton of damage, but was still able to go, pretty much full board at the end of the fight. Ben Henderson was right there matching him, and that's something Ben didn't fade, and if anything, was probably based on a combination of conditioning and the lack of damage he took, was in better shape at the end of that fight and could have kept going. And Frankie Edgar, it certainly showed up. Now, one thing that I noticed, and especially when I rewatched the fight, against Gray, Frankie used his speed and agility and footwork to stay away and attack and force Gray to chase him. With the way Ben was having success landing with power, it looked to me like Frankie was using that technique. He was doing nothing different than again in the Gray Maynard fight, but it looked to me like he was running away. And you combine that with the way he's beaten up and the damage that Ben does, and it looks like Ben is the more aggressive fighter. He's taking us under the cage, he's cutting things off, he's attacking Frankie. Frankie's, pitter-pattering away with his punches and kicks and combinations, and then he's moving away and getting out of there. And I think when it comes right down to it, Ben was doing more damage overall, and the visual of it for the judges really put it in Ben Henderson's corner. Looking at some of the stats from that fight, overall significant strikes landed. Henderson landed 87 on 264 attempts, Edgar 68 on 190. If you look at total strikes, it was 100 to 81 for Henderson. So when things were all said and done, Ben Henderson actually outlanded Frankie Edgar. So not only did he do more damage, he put more hands on him. Takedown attempts, Henderson 1 for 1 in his attempts, Frankie Edgar 5 for 12. Interesting thing with Edgar, when he tried to get the fight to the mat, when he did get Henderson off his feet, which I was very surprised because Henderson has excellent takedown defense, showed it against Clay Guida. But when Edgar did take Henderson down, he couldn't control him. Henderson was so strong, Frankie basically had to bail on the takedown attempt right away or risk losing position. And one thing that Ben did, and I expect to see it a lot more in this fight as well, is every time Edgar got a hold of him, Ben went for a Kimura, and it immediately forced Frankie to let go of the hold, or to let go of his position in fear of being attacked with a submission. I like that technique. Unless we get another Frankie Edgar knockout the way he did against Gray Maynard, I struggle to see where Edgar's going to change things up. His game plan works very well for him, but considering Ben is able to match him in conditioning and speed, and he's the bigger fighter and the stronger fighter, it makes it very difficult for Frankie Edgar to find the answer for what Ben Henderson does. And I like the way, again, I talked about before, I like the way Ben Henderson uses his Superman punch and the way he steps into his kicks and punches to close that distance that Frankie likes to maintain to attack. And he did a nice job of that in the last fight, and it really took away Frankie's ability to attack and navigate away and not take damage. And that's a big part of it. Ben, by no stretch of the imagination, dominated that fight, but he won the fight. He got the better of Frankie in pretty much every category, maybe other than takedowns, getting taken down 5 times, which, again, I'm shocked at when I look at that number. But, Ben nearly caught him in that guillotine. It was tight. Frankie's got a ton of heart and was able to power out of it. But I think this is the type of fight where we really see Frankie needs to go to featherweight, because Ben is a very big, strong, athletic, and fast lightweight that can match and outdo Frankie in pretty much every single category. Edgar, He's taken a ton of damage, and that's something. Another concern is against BJ and more against Gray than against Ben. His striking defense is questionable. He gets hit a lot. He has a lot of issues when it comes to taking damage, and that's something that's going to add up over his career. His striking strikes absorbed per minute 2.08. That's not a good number. It's not a bad number, but when guys like Ben Henderson and Gray Maynard are hitting you with regularity, it's gonna add up. It's gonna take away. Frankie could be due for a knockout. He's never been knocked out. He's only, he's been hurt, obviously, but he's never been knocked out. The guy's got a ton of heart. But the damage from the two Maynard fights, that damage from the Ben Henderson fight, it could be leading him up to a knockout. Either way, I like what Ben Henderson does. Look for him to cut off the cage, and the fact that he's already fought Frankie once and kind of figured him out. He's got that excellent Taekwondo background. He's very good on the mat. Excellent submission defense. Good takedown defense. I really think Ben's going to come in, and I think he's going to put a stamp on this one. I think he's going to decisively defeat Frankie Edgar here. So I'm going to take Ben Henderson to defeat Frankie Edgar by decision, retaining his title. He'll just build on what he did in the last fight and have a better all-around effort, outwork Frankie, and it's hard to believe you're going to outwork Frankie, but he's going to put in a good effort. His conditioning will just, and the damage that he piles up on Frankie will be the deciding factor. So again, Ben Henderson to defeat Frankie Edgar by decision and retain his UFC lightweight title. So those are my predictions for UFC 150. Who would have thought we'd be at UFC 150? Unbelievable numbers. I'm coming off a huge show at UFC on Fox. We're on 8-1, and my bet packs were fantastic. So please consider investing in the bet pack at kamikazeoverdrive.net. $10, and I'll give you a whole wealth of information: potential parlays, confidence picks, value bets, prop bets, fight-by-fight bet breakdowns based on the odds. Some of the guys I picked, I might say, stay away from them. The odds just aren't there. Some of the guys I picked against, I might say, take a shot with them because there certainly is value based on the number. Either way, a ton of money handed out based on my last bet pack. Consider buying them again this time, and stick it out. Don't just buy one. Buy the next couple, 2 or 3 in a row, and you'll see there's more winners than there are losers. Again, thank you very much for listening. We have Strikeforce on deck coming up in the near future. I think on August 18th, Ronda Rousey back in action. Should be an excellent fight. As always, thank you very much to my listeners. Thank you to all my supporters. Check out their other predictions from other predictors over at my website, so please check them out. And thank you very much for listening. I'm out of here.